My name is Sarah Kane. I am 38 years old, and until yesterday, I thought I was a woman with a stable life, a marriage, a mortgage, a modest career as a children's book illustrator. People used to say I had it all together. I was the dependable one, the quiet one, the one who made things work. For 12 years, I played that role perfectly, smiling through discomfort, shrinking myself to fit into the life Cole wanted, telling myself that love was compromise even when compromise felt like erasure. I met Cole at 25, at a charity event where I was showcasing my illustrations for a hospital fundraiser. He seemed so different from anyone I'd known, confident, charming, attentive. He said I had talent, that I was special. No one had ever looked at my art like that before. I mistook admiration for love and love for safety. We married within 2 years, and little by little, my world became his. He chose the neighborhood, the furniture, even the colors of the walls. He said, muted tones were more refined. I called it tasteful, but it muted me too. I took freelance work. I didn't enjoy just to keep the piece dry, corporate commissions that drained me but paid enough to keep the lights on. I stopped mentioning the stories I wanted to tell, the whimsical characters waiting patiently in the margins of my sketchbooks. I told myself their time would come later. I told myself I could wait. When his business began to crumble, I didn't flinch. I held him up, paid bills from my dwindling savings, cooked dinners he barely acknowledged, whispered encouragement in the silence, financially, emotionally, quietly. I gave him everything I had. Even the pieces of myself I didn't realize I was handing over. And each time he brushed me aside with a tired sigh or a condescending "let's be realistic," I swallowed the sting. I told myself he was just stressed, that it would pass, that this was what support looked like, even when it felt like erasure. I made myself small so he could feel big. I dimmed so he could shine. And for a while, I believed that was love. But yesterday, when he threw me out into the rain shouting, red-faced as if I were some intruder in the very home I helped build, it wasn't the first time I felt unwanted. It was just the first time he said it out loud. The truth is, I had been vanishing slowly for years. In every conversation where my opinion was brushed aside, in every joke at my expense during dinners with his colleagues, in every eye roll when I talked about my illustrations, as if my work was a child's pastime instead of a career. In every moment he let silence stretch between us, heavy with dismissal rather than comfort. But until that night, he had never put it into words, never screamed it while hurling a wedding vase across the room, never opened the front door in the middle of a storm and flung my suitcase onto the wet pavement like I was luggage he'd grown tired of carrying. Never looked me in the eye and said, "Get out. And don't come back." That was new. But the loneliness, the feeling of being invisible in my own life that had been with me for a long, long time, and maybe that's what saved me. Because when the door slammed behind me and the rain began to pour and my life lay scattered on the sidewalk, I didn't feel like I was losing everything. I felt like I was finally waking up. That night, after standing in the rain with my life scattered on the sidewalk, I drove aimlessly through unfamiliar streets, windshield wipers struggling against the storm. My thoughts blurred with the downpour, no destination, just motion. Then, like a beacon, the flickering neon sign of a modest hotel pulled me in. It wasn't beautiful, but it was open. And I was tired in a way I'd never felt before. Room 204 smelled faintly of cleaning spray and old carpet. I stood there dripping, shivering, carrying nothing but a torn suitcase, damp clothes, and 12 years of silence I hadn't even realized I'd been living in. I didn't unpack. I didn't even turn on the television. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my coat, the weight of everything settling into my bones. In my hand, my phone glowed, the screen still open to the email ID read that morning. "We are pleased to inform you that the estate of Eleanor Blackwood has been settled." I read it again, and again. Not to confirm it was real, I knew it was. I needed to feel its truth sink in. I needed something to anchor me, proof that there was a part of my life, my story, that wasn't tied to Cole. Something untouched by his anger, his disappointment, his quiet erosion of who I used to be. It wasn't just an inheritance. It was a lifeline. And for the first time in years, I realized I wasn't powerless. Not anymore. The next morning, I called the number listed for the estate attorney. Patricia Winters answered with a calm, even voice that immediately made me feel less alone. "We've been expecting your call, Sarah," she said. Within hours, I was in her office, sipping tea I could barely taste while she laid out everything. The trust, the assets, the instructions left behind by Aunt Eleanor. There was a separate account already open in my name, with $250,000 I could access immediately. There was a fully maintained home in Crescent Bay, tucked along the cliffs, and finally a sealed letter. "She asked that you read this privately," Patricia said gently. Back at the hotel, I opened the letter with both dread and longing, as if I were about to hear her voice one last time. The paper trembled slightly in my hands, softened at the edges by time but unmistakably hers. Aunt Eleanor's handwriting was elegant, deliberate, like every word had been chosen with care. "You've always had more strength than you know. Sarah, don't let the people who fear your light convince you to snuff it out. Use what I've left you not to hide, but to live as boldly as I could in tea." I read it once, then again, and again. Each time the words burrowed deeper, dislodging something in me I hadn't realized was stuck all the years I silenced myself to keep others comfortable, all the times I laughed off cruelty, minimized pain, stayed small so someone else could feel big. I cried harder reading that letter than I had the night before, not because I felt broken, but because for the first time I felt seen. She had witnessed something no one else had. She had seen me. And she hadn't just left me money. She left me permission to begin again. The following afternoon, I drove to Crescent Bay. The house, my house, stood proudly on the edge of the world, facing the Pacific with windows wide open to light. Inside, there was a studio waiting for me. A real one. With fresh supplies, a long wooden desk, and the smell of sea salt clinging to the air. Eleanor had known exactly what I needed, even before I did. But Cole didn't vanish. He lingered not in person, but in the form of buzzing notifications and unread messages that pulsed like old bruises. His words at first came soft, wrapped in guilt, and the language of regret. I didn't mean it. I was just stressed. Work is killing me. Please come home, Liv. Let's talk. But when my silence held, when I didn't run back like I always had, the mask began to crack. The sweetness soured. "You stole the car. I've spoken to a psychiatrist. Your behavior is erratic. People are worried. This isn't like you." It wasn't concern. It was control dressed in new clothes. Still the same script. But this time, I saw it for what it was, and I didn't flinch. I called Patricia. She didn't ask why. She didn't need to. "He's escalating," she said calmly. "Let us get you protected." By nightfall, a team from the security company had arrived at the house. They installed cameras at every entry point, smart locks with temporary codes, an emergency alert system linked directly to local responders. I watched them work from the corner of the studio, hugging a cup of tea that had long gone cold. I wasn't afraid. I was aware. I was ready. The car, still legally half mine. He could bark all he wanted. Patricia made sure his bark had no bite. And the messages? They kept coming, alternating between rage, pity, and veiled threats. But they became background static, like a distant radio station I no longer tuned into, because for the first time in years, I was choosing myself. Not quietly, not timidly, not as a last resort or whispered rebellion, but fully, loudly. And without asking permission, the Sarah who once needed his approval didn't exist anymore. And as I stood there, in the very house where I had once silenced myself to keep the peace, I realized just how far I'd come. Just days ago, I was shivering in a hotel room, unsure of what came next. Now, surrounded by friends, protected by law, and guided by a lawyer who understood the language of power and control. I was taking my life back piece by piece. Zoe filmed the entire retrieval on her phone, just as Andrea advised. "Document everything," she had said. "Control loves to hide in silence." We were not giving him that. Mia moved with quiet efficiency, checking off items from the list ID carefully prepared: birth certificate, tax records, my grandmother's pendant, sketchbooks filled with stories ID never dared submit. Every drawer opened was a reminder of what ID once lost. Every item recovered was a reclamation. Cole, of course, didn't stay quiet. He lingered like smoke, not loud enough to ignite, but present enough to choke the air. As we moved through the house collecting what was mine, he hovered in the kitchen doorway, arms folded, voice dripping with bitterness. "You've changed," he muttered. Eyes narrowed. "You're not the same woman I married." And for once, I agreed with him. I wasn't T. I didn't flinch when his voice sharpened. I didn't shrink when his tone turned cruel. I didn't justify, didn't explain, didn't soothe his discomfort the way I used to, the way I had been trained to. Officer Ramirez stepped forward, firm and composed. "Mr. Mercer, you need to maintain distance. You are in violation of the protective order." He scoffed, rolled his eyes, and stormed upstairs like a child denied his toy. But I knew better than to relax. Control never disappears. It evolves. It hides behind sorrow and fury and silence alike, waiting for cracks to creep back in. And yet I didn't T-crack. Not this time. As Zoe and Mia helped carry boxes down the front steps, I took one last look around, not with longing, but with clear eyes. The house we built wasn't home. It was a stage, one I no longer performed on. When we closed the trunk, my portfolio safely tucked inside, I caught sight of Cole at the upstairs window. He watched us, unmoving, unreadable. For years, that look would sent me spiraling, questioning, apologizing, bending to fit back into the space he allowed. But now it meant nothing. He no longer got to define who I was or what I chose, because I wasn't retreating, I wasn't escaping, and I wasn't ashamed. I was walking forward, arms full of my past, feet steady on new ground, heart carrying the proof that I had endured something sharp and come out clear, and I wasn't going back. Back at Crescent Bay, I unpacked my reclaimed life slowly, deliberately, not just the belongings I had fought to retrieve, but the forgotten fragments of myself buried beneath years of compromise. Each item I set down in my new home was more than an object. It was a marker of survival. The studio, nestled in the sunlit corner of the house, faced the ocean like it was waiting for me. And maybe it had been. I began to draw again, not for approval, not for income, not even for purpose, just for breath, just for release. My sketchbooks filled with raw, unapologetic images, women with stitched scars and fierce eyes, girls with broken wings learning how to fly again. I drew burning houses behind calm faces. I drew open doors and untied knots. I drew myself. Grief came in strange waves, not always sharp, but deep. Grief for the years I gave to a man who couldn't see me, for the stories I abandoned, the mornings I spent tiptoeing around someone else's volatility. It wasn't just about what had been done to me, but what I had silenced in myself to stay safe. But every line I drew was an act of return. With every stroke of charcoal, every smear of color, I reclaimed my voice not as it had been before, but stronger, clearer, rooted in truth. I wasn't rebuilding the old me. I was becoming someone new, someone I had always been, underneath it all. 3 months passed. Then one afternoon, standing in the converted gallery space where Aunt Eleanor's art had once been stored, I saw my work, my story hanging on the walls. The show was called Emergence, a visual memoir of my journey from suppression to selfhood. Friends came. Strangers cried. A publisher approached me after the opening, moved by the rawness of my images. "We'd like to turn this into a book," she said. "Not just the art, the story too." Women need this. And just when I thought I'd found my footing, a familiar shadow appeared. Cole. He arrived near the end of the second night, lurking at the edge of the crowd like a storm front. Our eyes met across the room. For a second, the old tremor flickered in my chest. But then it passed. I stood taller. A hired security guard, someone Andrea, insisted on intercepted him before he could reach me. Cole said something about just wanting to talk, but his voice didn't carry weight anymore. Not here. Not in this space I had built with my own hands. He left, and I didn't follow. Later that evening, as the gallery quieted and guests lingered over wine, I spotted my mother standing near a large canvas titled Crossing. She looked small in the bright lights, her hands folded tightly in front of her. We hadn't spoken much since I left Cole. She had always told me to be patient, to support my husband, to not escalate. Now she stepped closer. "It's us, isn't it?" she asked quietly, gesturing to the painting. Two women, one older, one younger, stood on either side of a turbulent river, a bridge slowly forming between them. I nodded. "It's how it's always felt." She exhaled shakily. "I asked your father to move out last week." My breath caught. "You did?" She nodded. "I watched what you did, leaving, rebuilding, and I saw myself. I saw all the years I defended men who needed control more than love. I'm sorry, Sarah. I taught you to endure. I should have taught you to walk away. We didn't hug. Not right away. We just stood there. Two women slowly learning how to reach each other across old waters. And it was enough. 6 months after that first night in the rain, I sat in a courtroom across from the man who once told me I'd be nothing without him. The evidence was clear. The texts, the financial records, the threats, the attempt to weaponize mental health. Andrea laid it all out, calmly and methodically. Cole's lawyer tried to shift blame, called it stress, called it misunderstanding, said Cole regretted everything. But the judge wasn't swayed. She asked one simple question. Did Mr. Mercer eject his wife from their shared home during a storm, and then proceed to freeze all joint assets and threaten her with institutionalization? No one could deny it. The court ruled in my favor. Cole lost access to the accounts. The trust remained untouched, exactly as Aunt Eleanor had arranged. His efforts to claim a portion of the inheritance were dismissed outright, and the house in Ridgemont Heights, now underwater in debt, was his to keep. Fitting. Somehow, our divorce was finalized that same day. It was over. Legally, emotionally, and finally, spiritually. I didn't celebrate with champagne. I didn't throw a party. Instead, I returned to Crescent Bay, to the house with sea air and wide skies, and I sat at my drafting table. There, surrounded by the tools of my trade and the quiet pulse of a life reclaimed, I finished my latest work, a children's book about a girl and her magic paintbrush. It wasn't just whimsical. The brush could reveal what was hidden. Truth beneath lies, color beneath grayness. Beauty in the places others called broken. The book was just for children. It was for anyone who had ever been told to shrink. Anyone who needed permission to see clearly again. And somewhere within those pages, I saw myself not as I had been, but as I had become. Late that evening, I walked barefoot down the worn path behind the house. The wooden boards warm from the sun and cool from the breeze. The Pacific stretched out endlessly before me, a vast breathing canvas of deep blue and silver. Salt clung to the air like memory. The wind wrapped around my shoulders not to push me back, but to urge me forward. I stood at the cliff's edge where sea met sky, where horizon blurred and boundaries meant nothing. There was no fear in me now. No ache for answers. I wasn't searching anymore. Not for permission. Not for closure. Not even for justice. Because this was an escape. This was flight. I had not just left Cole. I had outgrown him. I had risen from the quiet I used to live in, shaken the dust of apology from my voice, and stepped fully into the space I once believed I had to earn. I had found myself not the version shaped to fit someone else's world, but the woman I was always meant to become. whole, free.